Have you ever wondered why, all over the world, from Rome to St. Petersburg, from Alexandria to Paris, these strange, solitary giants stand? Huge, perfectly polished stone pillars reaching towards the sky, to which nothing is attached. Historians, with a smile, explain to us that these are simply monuments, triumphal columns, tributes to emperors, military leaders, and forgotten gods. But allow me to ask you one simple question that shatters this cozy academic fairy tale. Why build a complex engineering structure weighing hundreds of tons that carries no functional load? We are brazenly lied to our faces, and the scale of this lie is so immense that an ordinary person simply fears believing it. Official history cracks at the seams if you only apply a ruler and a calculator to it. Today, we will tear back the veil from one of the most inconvenient mysteries of our civilization. We will talk about the solitary columns. And believe me, after this video you will never be able to look at the Alexander column or Pompey's column with the same eyes again. You will see not a monument, but a technical device or a ruin of something so grand that our mind refuses to perceive it. Let's start with facts that lie on the surface, but which we are used to ignoring. Let's take, for example, the Jewel of St. Petersburg, the Alexander column. We are told that it was installed in 1834. Architect Auguste Montferrand allegedly used an ingenious system of scaffolding, ropes, and the muscular strength of thousands of soldiers. Sounds heroic, doesn't it? And now let's turn on our logic and refer to the dry figures and material resistance. The weight of the column's shaft is over 600 tons. It is a monolith, a solid piece of granite. Do you even imagine what 600 tons is? That is the weight of 10 modern railway cars loaded with coal, or 3 huge Boeing 747 passenger planes. And we are offered to believe that this colossal weight was moved on wooden rollers, using hemp ropes. Engineers and builders who work with modern heavy machinery know that lifting a load weighing even 100 tons is a highly complex special operation, requiring hydraulics, steel cables, and computer calculation of loads. And here we are shown pictures from Montferrand's album, where drawn little men cheerfully pull ropes. This is not technical documentation. This is a comic book for naive children. If we calculate the coefficient of friction, the tensile strength of hemp, and the required force, it will turn out that lifting such a monolith would require such a number of people that it would be physically impossible to place them on Palace Square. They would simply crush each other. But the most interesting thing is not even in the lifting. The most interesting thing is in the processing. Approach any of these columns closely. Look at the quality of the polishing. It's a perfect sheen. Granite is one of the hardest materials on Earth. To achieve such a surface manually would require decades of work by thousands of stonemasons who would rub the stone with sand and water. But we see not just smooth stone. We see a perfect geometric shape. It's a cylinder or a cone with an impeccable radius. Any lathe operator will tell you that such a body of revolution can only be created in one way, by rotating the workpiece. Do you hear me? Rotating a workpiece weighing 600 tons. This means that the builders, whoever they were, possessed lathes of cyclopean dimensions. Not a chisel and a hammer, but industrial machines working with carbide cutters and enormous rotational speeds. Traces of this machine processing are visible to the naked eye, if you know where to look. But historians stubbornly tell us about the manual labor of serfs. This lie becomes even more obvious if we look at the geography. Exactly the same columns stand in Baalbek, in Egypt, in Rome. Pompey's column in Alexandria is another monolith of red granite weighing almost 300 tons. And again, the same story. Not a single document, not a single drawing of real mechanisms, only myths and legends about how primitive people in sandals did it. Official chronology separates these structures by thousands of years from each other. We are told that the Romans built one thing, the Egyptians another. and in the Russian Empire they simply imitated antiquity. But the technical signature is the same everywhere. It is a single standard, a single GOST, if you will. Identical proportions, identical material, identical traces of mechanical processing. This tells us that these objects were created by the same civilization, possessing a global infrastructure and technologies that surpassed our modern capabilities. Why do they stand alone? Why is nothing attached to them? Why do often completely disproportionate, small statues of angels or saints stand on the tops of these columns, appearing as alien elements? The answer is obvious. The statues were placed later. Much later. Those who came to the ruins of the old world found these gigantic pillars, and, not understanding their true purpose, decided to use them as pedestals for their new idols. This is cargo cult in its purest form. We, like savages, found the remnants of a high-tech civilization and adapted them to our primitive needs, declaring them monuments of victories. But if we remove these statues, what will we see? We will see perfectly smooth, polished shafts reaching into the sky. Some researchers point out that many columns are hollow inside or have metal rods running through the entire structure. For example, Trajan's column in Rome. Inside it is a spiral staircase carved into the stone. Just think about the complexity of such work. To carve a perfect spiral inside marble blocks, to join them with sub-millimeter precision. This is a level of precision available today only to computer numerical control (CNC) machines. Why such complexity for a monument? Why make it functional internally, if externally it's just decor? We stand on the threshold of a terrifying discovery. These columns were never monuments. They were part of a gigantic technical network, spanning the entire planet. Perhaps they were supports for something that was destroyed. Or perhaps they themselves were devices. Generators, transmitters, atmospheric capacitors. We are used to thinking that electricity was discovered in the 19th century. But what if we simply rediscovered what was available to humanity thousands of years ago? What if these granite behemoths are the remnants of a single energy system of the past, which we foolishly call temples and monuments? Look at the composition of granite. It is crystalline quartz, possessing a piezoelectric effect. When compressed, it generates an electrical charge. 600 tons of granite create colossal internal pressure. This is not just a stone, it is a huge battery, standing on strictly defined geodesic points of the Earth. Official science fears these questions like fire, because if it is admitted that the Alexander Column cannot be made by hand, the entire history of the 19th century will have to be rewritten. It will have to be acknowledged that there was no backward, Bast-shoed Russia, but rather a territory with the highest technologies, which then suddenly disappeared. Where did these machines go? Where did the masters go? Why did a break in the technological chain occur? The answer to this question lies in demographic collapses and strange inconsistencies in population censuses, which we will discuss a little later. But for now, fix this fact in your mind. Solitary columns are markers of lies. These are material proofs of the existence of another history, which has been meticulously erased from us. And the deeper we dig, the more terrifying the picture will become. We have only just begun to dismantle this foundation of lies, and believe me, beneath it lie the ruins of our true past. Let's delve into the technical details that would make any engineer with a specialized education's hair stand on end. If we discard the tales of tour guides and open textbooks on material resistance and logistics, the official version of the construction of the columns of St. Isaac's Cathedral, or the Alexander Column itself, will crumble to dust. We are told that granite was quarried in the Pautalaxa quarries, cut by hand, loaded onto wooden barges, and transported to St. Petersburg. Sounds like a plan, but let's calculate. The weight of one column of St. Isaac's Cathedral is 114 tons. There are 112 of them in total. Do you understand the scale of the logistical operation? In the early 19th century, There were no railways capable of withstanding such a load, nor asphalt highways. The roads of that time were compacted dirt roads that turned into impassable mud after the first rain. Try to transport a 100-ton load on a cart over wet clay. The wheels would instantly sink into the ground up to their axles. Physics cannot be cheated. The ground pressure from such a load is colossal. To move such heavy loads, a specially prepared route with a concrete foundation is needed, which, according to official history, simply did not exist at that time. And now look at the very structure of the stone. Official science claims that all these columns are carved from natural rock mass. But alternative researchers conducting macrophotography of the surface find strange anomalies, inclusions that look like air bubbles frozen within the mass, a layered structure resembling concrete poured in batches. More and more facts indicate that what we see is not natural granite, but high-quality geopolymer concrete, an artificial stone technology that was known to the ancients and which we are only now beginning to remaster. This explains everything, both the ideal shape and the absence of chisel marks and the possibility of creating gigantic monoliths. They were not dragged from distant lands. They were poured directly on site in formwork, just as we pour monolithic high-rises today. But to admit this means admitting that chemistry and materials science in the past were on par with, or even superior to, modern levels. Who gave these formulas to the architects of the 19th century? Or more likely, these columns had already stood there for centuries, and Montferrand and his team were merely engaged in their restoration and clearing. Pay attention to engravings of that time, for example, the works of Piranesi. Historians call him a fantasist, a visionary artist who drew imaginary ruins. But why are his fantasies so photographically accurate? In his engravings, we see gigantic structures, overgrown with trees, buried under earth, among which small people in rags wander. These people are clearly not builders. They are inhabitants of ruins. They light fires at the base of cyclopean columns, using the debris of magnificent architecture as furniture. This is a post-apocalyptic picture, a picture of a world that survived a global catastrophe. And these solitary columns, scattered throughout the world, are the framework of that lost world. The skeleton of a gigantic planetary-scale building whose walls were swept away by a cataclysm. Let's move to Baalbek, in the territory of modern Lebanon. There, at the base of the Temple of Jupiter, lie the famous trilithons, stone blocks weighing 800 or even 1,000 tons each. Official history ascribes them to the Romans. The Romans! The very same people whose peak lifting technology was a wooden block and tackle crane, capable of lifting a maximum of 5 to 6 tons. Do you feel this monstrous gap between reality and what is written in textbooks? To lift 1,000 tons today, you need paired Liebherr crawler cranes, each the size of a house. And we are told that the Romans did this with ropes and blocks. This isn't even funny. It's an insult to our intelligence. Moreover, the quarry is below the level of the temple. This means these stones not only had to be dragged, they had to be dragged uphill. What coefficient of friction? What traction force? If you try to calculate the number of people needed to move such a stone, you will get a crowd that would stretch for kilometers. It's impossible to command such a crowd, impossible to synchronize efforts. And here we come to the main question. Why such gigantomania? Why couldn't they build with bricks or smaller blocks, as normal people do? Why create insurmountable engineering difficulties for themselves? The answer is simple and terrifying. For those who built it, it was not difficult, it was standard. For them, working with 1,000 tons was as routine as laying cinder blocks is for us. This means that gravity was not an issue for them. Either they possessed machines of incredible power, or technologies for weight control, anti-gravity, sonic levitation, call it what you will. But it wasn't us. And it wasn't the Romans with their sandals. And now look at how these objects are used. Primitive walls of rough, unprocessed stone or clay are often attached to these gigantic columns in Baalbek, in Egypt, in Rome. This is the real work of those civilizations known to us from textbooks. They came to what was already there, inhabited the ruins, molded their shacks between the great pillars of the past. That is why the columns stand alone. Everything that was built around them by that great civilization was destroyed. Only the strongest, most fundamental elements remained, the load-bearing supports. We live in a world of secondary use. We are a civilization of scavengers who have appropriated the achievements of gods and called them our history. Why do scientists remain silent? Why is anyone who dares to mention geopolymer concrete or the impossibility of manual granite processing immediately declared a pseudoscientist? Because at stake is not just the dating of this or that temple's construction. At stake is the legitimacy of modern power and the entire system of knowledge. If we admit that a more developed civilization existed before us, which perished overnight, the question arises, what killed it? And could it happen again? And most importantly, who now governs the world, hiding the truth about our origin from us? Perhaps we are not the pinnacle of evolution, as Darwin instilled in us, but the degraded descendants of survivors? Or even worse, a new population, artificially settled on a cleared territory. Look at maps from the 18th century. There are cities that no longer exist. There are rivers that flow in a different direction. The geography of the past differs from the modern. This suggests that the planet's topography changed quite recently, and the solitary columns are geodesic markers, beacons that withstood this chaos of world reshaping. Now let's turn to the most terrifying evidence, which lies not in the field of geology or material strength, but in dry statistics and demographics. These are the numbers that historians hate the most. We are painted pictures of great 19th century empires, of booming construction and flourishing arts. But if we open the real demographic reports of that time, we will see emptiness, a mathematical impossibility. Let's take St. Petersburg or Paris in the mid-19th century. We are told that these cities were built by hundreds of thousands of workers. But the population size in those years simply does not correspond to the declared scale of construction. To build a structure on the scale of St. Isaac's Cathedral or the Capitol in Washington with those technologies, a superpower's economy and an army of skilled craftsmen who would need to be fed, clothed, and trained for decades would be required. And we are shown a world where 90% of the population are illiterate peasants, surviving by subsistence farming. Where did the resources come from? This is an economic paradox. Imagine a modern third world country, without roads or electricity, suddenly beginning to build a spaceport on the scale of Cape Canaveral, using only hoes and wheelbarrows. This is absurd. But it is this absurdity that we are forced to believe. And here we come to a phenomenon that alternative researchers call the empty cities effect. Look at the first daguerreotypes and photographs from the 1850s and 1860s. Paris, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Rome. Vast avenues, majestic buildings, and not a soul. Ghost cities, rare solitary figures who look lost against the backdrop of cyclopean scenery. Historians offer excuses. It's a long exposure. People simply blurred and disappeared. But the water in the rivers in these photos is clear, the shadows from the trees are clear, yet the crowds of people who should be teeming in the capitals of empires have vanished without a trace? No, friends, this is not long exposure. This is a snapshot of the moment of settlement. We see the world immediately after a reset. Those who survived, or those who were brought here, enter empty cities left by giants. And this is where the solitary columns acquire their true meaning. These are not monuments. These are surviving fragments of infrastructure that proved too robust to be swept away by a catastrophe we call the mud flood. Look at the bases of these columns. Very often, archaeological excavations show that what we consider ground level is actually an accumulation several meters thick. The columns extend deep downwards. They do not have a foundation in the usual sense. They are simply buried under soil, clay, and sand. The Roman Forum was excavated from beneath a multi-meter layer of earth. The Polytechnic Museum in Moscow, buildings in Kazan and Omsk, everywhere we see buried floors, windows and doors going underground. They try to convince us that this is how it was built, that this is a cultural layer. Are you serious? A cultural layer is when you throw garbage under your feet and don't clean it up for 1,000 years. But here we are talking about entire first floors buried in clay. These are traces of a planetary scale mudflow, a wave that swept across continents, carrying tons of soil with it, destroyed fragile structures, but could not fell these granite shafts. The solitary columns are trees in a stone forest that survived a tsunami. Everything else was washed away, and the new masters of life who came to the ruins simply cleared the areas around, called them squares, and invented beautiful legends about construction. And look at the ergonomics. This is perhaps the most inconvenient point for the official version. The height of steps in ancient temples, the sizes of doorways, handles on the doors of ancient cathedrals, which are impossible for an ordinary person to reach. These buildings, of which our solitary columns were once a part, were not built for us. They were built for beings 3 to 4 meters tall. We look like children who put on their father's shoes in these settings. We are Lilliputians in a land of giants. All these gigantic arches, soaring ceilings, huge windows, this is not architectural pathos. This is a functional necessity for those who lived there. But where did they go? Why are only we left? Here we enter the territory of the darkest conjecture. Perhaps the history of humanity is a history of artificial selection. Recall the huge number of orphanages and boarding schools in the 19th century. Children appeared by the thousands, without parents, without a past. They were taught from scratch, given new surnames, taught a new invented history. We, as a population, could have been restored from a test tube or incubator after the previous civilization was destroyed. We are the second shift on this planet, and we were given a simplified version of reality so that we wouldn't ask unnecessary questions. The solitary columns stand as silent witnesses to this crime. Nothing is attached to them because all the floor slabs, roofs, and walls were destroyed. We see only the skeleton. Imagine a modern skyscraper from which all its cladding, glass, and partitions have been stripped away, leaving only the load-bearing concrete pillars. 1,000 years from now, savages will find these pillars and worship them as phallic symbols of gods. This is exactly what we are doing today. We walk around technical structures, call them the Alexandrian column or Trajan's column, and do not even suspect that we are standing in the middle of a gigantic ruined power plant or factory. This thought is frightening. It makes one feel like a grain of sand, deceived and abandoned. But it also provides a key to understanding. If we acknowledge the fact of a catastrophe, the fact of the replacement of population and technologies, then all the inconsistencies of history instantly disappear. It becomes clear why we cannot replicate polygonal masonry, why we have unlearned how to make such bricks, why we cannot cast such a vase from granite. We have not unlearned it. We never knew how to do it in the first place. They knew how, those who came before us, and whose legacy we are now so ineptly exploiting. But the most interesting thing is that the technologies of the past have not disappeared without a trace. They are encrypted within the architecture itself. If you take a world map and mark on it the points where these grandiose solitary columns stand, and then connect them with lines, a cold shiver will run down your spine. This is not a chaotic arrangement of monuments. This is a perfectly calibrated geometric grid. Lines pass through continents and oceans, forming regular triangles and polygons. Communications engineers, looking at this scheme, would instantly recognize in it the topology of a cellular network or a signal distribution system. These stone needles are thrust into the body of the planet at strictly defined nodal points. This is Earth's acupuncture. This is the nervous system of a gigantic organism that once pulsed with energy, but is now dead. We have approached the most dangerous part of our investigation. To the answer to the question, what exactly did these columns do? Recall Nikola Tesla, a genius who claimed that energy could be transmitted wirelessly over any distance. He built his Wardenclyffe Towers, which suspiciously resembled our granite monoliths in principle of operation. Tesla was not inventing anything new. He was simply trying to reanimate a forgotten technology of the past. The technology of extracting atmospheric electricity, granite, saturated with quartz, under the pressure of its own colossal weight, becomes a piezoelectric generator. The metallic finials, which we today mistake for crosses or statues of angels, were originally receivers or emitters. These were resonators. The entire planet was covered by a dome of free, clean, infinite energy. Imagine a world where there is no need to burn oil and coal, where light and heat are available anywhere on the globe just like that, by right of birth. We walk around technical structures, call them the Alexandrian column or Trajan's column, and do not even suspect that we are standing in the middle of a gigantic ruined power plant or factory. This thought is frightening. It makes one feel like a grain of sand, deceived and abandoned. But it also provides a key to understanding. If we acknowledge the fact of a catastrophe, the fact of the replacement of population and technologies, then all the inconsistencies of history instantly disappear. It becomes clear why we cannot replicate polygonal masonry, why we have unlearned how to make such bricks, why we cannot cast such a vase from granite. We have not unlearned it. We never knew how to do it in the first place. They knew how, those who came before us, and whose legacy we are now so ineptly exploiting. But the most interesting thing is that the technologies of the past have not disappeared without a trace. They are encrypted within the architecture itself. If you take a world map and mark on it the points where these grandiose solitary columns stand, and then connect them with lines, a cold shiver will run down your spine. This is not a chaotic arrangement of monuments. This is a perfectly calibrated geometric grid. Lines pass through continents and oceans, forming regular triangles and polygons. Communications engineers, looking at this scheme, would instantly recognize in it the topology of a cellular network or a signal distribution system. These stone needles are thrust into the body of the planet at strictly defined nodal points. This is Earth's acupuncture. This is the nervous system of a gigantic organism that once pulsed with energy, but is now dead. We have approached the most dangerous part of our investigation. To the answer to the question, what exactly did these columns do? Recall Nikola Tesla, a genius who claimed that energy could be transmitted wirelessly over any distance. He built his Wardenclyffe Towers, which suspiciously resembled our granite monoliths in principle of operation. Tesla was not inventing anything new. He was simply trying to reanimate a forgotten technology of the past. The technology of extracting atmospheric electricity. Granite, saturated with quartz, under the pressure of its own colossal weight, becomes a piezoelectric generator. The metallic finials, which we today mistake for crosses or statues of angels, were originally receivers or emitters. These were resonators. The entire planet was covered by a dome of free, clean, infinite energy. Imagine a world where there is no need to burn oil and coal, where light and heat are available anywhere on the globe just like that, by right of birth, where flying machines, those very vimanas from ancient texts, hover in the sky, propelled by the electromagnetic field generated by these columns. This was a golden age. This was a paradise that was taken from us. Why? Because free people cannot be controlled. If you have heat, light, and the ability to move, you are independent. You are not a slave to the system. To turn us into an obedient herd, they first had to flip the switch, destroy the towers, remove the resonators, and then, when the memory of generations faded, give us electricity meters and hook us on the oil needle. We pay money for what our ancestors took from the air. This is the greatest scam in the history of the universe. But the disabling of this system did not pass without a trace. There is a theory that makes one's blood run cold. What if the global catastrophe, that very mud flood and buried cities, is the result of an overload of this energy system? Perhaps a conflict occurred, a war of gods. Someone decided to use this network as a weapon of incredible destructive power. Recall the strange, great fires of the 19th century. Chicago, Boston, Moscow. Cities burned to the ground, with the fire melting brick and stone, turning them into glass. An ordinary fire does not produce such temperatures. These are traces of plasma impact, directed energy strikes. The columns withstood because they were part of the circuit, they were grounded, and everything nearby turned into dust and ashes. This dust then fell with the rain, covering the planet with a multi-meter layer of mud. And we, the survivors or the newly created, crawl through this mud, excavate the first floors of palaces, and wonder how our ancestors built such beautiful basements with windows. We live in the graveyard of a great civilization, using its gravestones as tourist attractions. We look at the Alexander column and do not see that it is a de-energized induction coil. We are a cargo cult, praying to a broken airplane that will never fly again. The realization of this fact causes anger. We were not just deceived. We were reduced to the level of livestock. Look at the architecture of modern human hives, concrete boxes in which we live, and compare them with ancient palaces with ceilings almost 5 meters high. Do you feel the difference in the attitude towards humans? Then man was a creator, equal to gods. Now man is an economic unit, a battery, a resource. Those who seized power after the catastrophe rewrote history, invented Scaliger's chronology, extended centuries, divided the unified world into warring states so that we could never unite and restore what was lost. Divide and conquer. This principle has worked flawlessly for hundreds of years, and the solitary columns stand as a silent reproach. They are the only thing the usurpers could not destroy or hide. They are too enormous, too conspicuous. Therefore, they decided to hide them in plain sight. Call them monuments, invent legends about Montferrand and Roman emperors, conceal the technology behind the facade of art. This is a brilliant move. If you want to hide something, put it in plain sight. We walk past, take selfies, and do not even suspect that we are touching the casing of a reactor or an intercontinental communication antenna with our hand. And here arises another frightening thought. What if they are not completely switched off? What if they are simply in standby mode? What if these granite shafts continue to emit certain frequencies that affect our consciousness, suppress our will, reduce cognitive abilities, force us to be passive consumers? The vibrations of granite, the geometry of the forms, all of this is psychotronic influence. We live inside a gigantic machine which perhaps keeps us in this semi-somnolent state, preventing us from waking up and realizing reality. We are prisoners without bars, and these beautiful columns are the bars of our mental cage. But any knowledge is the first step to liberation. As soon as you begin to see a technical device in a column, the spell breaks. The matrix glitches. You stop being an obedient element of the system and become an explorer. You start asking questions, and questions are the most dangerous weapon against lies.